Okay, so there's some new research coming out where an expert linguist thinks he's found the word Nephite. The Nephites were a group in the Book of Mormon, one of the major groups in the Book of Mormon. He thinks he's found the word Nephite among an indigenous group today. They basically are using a form of Nephite to identify themselves, and he names two specific groups here. And we're going to go over all of that in this video. First, all this comes from this book here, In the Eyes of the Ancients, which was just barely published. It's a collection of essays from Latter-day Saint scholars who excel in their fields, different topics about the Book of Mormon, and Brian Stubbs is one of them. Now, who is Brian Stubbs? Brian Stubbs is a linguist and an expert in the Uto-Aztecan language, which is basically a Native American language family that we're going to go over in a bit. But he's published a lot in this. He has one of the top books in it. He's one of just a few experts in this language family, and he's been praised for his contribution to this field. He also has expertise in Semitic languages like Hebrew and Egyptian and other languages. And he believes he's found connections of Hebrew or Egyptian within Uto-Aztecan. And he's studied other Native American languages, and only in Uto-Aztecan has he seen so many similarities. And linguists study patterns and how sounds change over time. So, for example, they've noticed that the P will sometimes change to the F sound. So in Latin, pater was changed to father. And he's noticing these changes within Uto-Aztecan from Hebrew or Egyptian to what we have in Uto-Aztecan today. So one example of a Semitic word changing to a Uto-Aztecan word is when B changes to P. The Hebrew word baka, which basically means to cry, in Uto-Aztecan, baka also means to cry. Now, just to be clear, I don't know these languages. I'm not pronouncing them correctly. So again, look at his work or watch his videos where he goes over the pronunciation himself. But that's kind of an example here, and he's found hundreds of these. It's all very fascinating. We're not going to go over the details in this video, but you can check out all these essays here about it if you want. So what is Uto-Aztecan? Well, it's a Native American language family. So basically, English and Danish, I say Danish because I served my mission in Denmark. I used to speak Danish. They come from the same language family, Germanic languages. So I could tell some similarities when I was learning Danish and English, but they're still very different. Well, Uto-Aztecan is its own language family that has branched off into many different languages spanning from Utah to Mexico. Uto for Utah and Aztecan for the Aztec area. And if you're from Utah, there's some pretty neat things about Uto-Aztecan here. So basically around 1100 AD, the Numic branch of Uto-Aztecan spread north from Southern California to the Utah area and branched into different languages like Shoshone and Ute and Paiute and Goshute. So those are all part of the Numic branch of the Uto-Aztecan language family. Hopi is another Uto-Aztecan language, but it's earlier, so it's not from the Numic branch, but it's similar in ways because it's from the same language family. Brian Stubbs and I did an interview on the Ancient America Foundation channel where we go over all of its history and some fascinating things about that. So you can check that out if you want to learn more about the Uto-Aztecan family. So it's in this language family where he thinks he's found evidence of Hebrew in Uto-Aztecan. Now, what's interesting here is this supports a Mesoamerican model. And what Brian Stubbs thinks is when the Book of Mormon mentions the people traveling northward, that this Uto-Aztecan language family shows or demonstrates the language going northward. So this language family could be evidence of when the Book of Mormon peoples traveled northward or when Haggoth's ship traveled northward. Now, just to be clear, we're not saying Uto-Aztecan directly came from Book of Mormon peoples. What we're saying is there was already Native American groups here that spoke Uto-Aztecan, and when the Book of Mormon peoples came in and merged and mixed with them, then the language also merged and mixed, and some Hebrew followed in through this language family. Now, this is just my little theory, but at the end of the Book of Mormon, after the final battle and there's only Moroni left, he takes the plates and he travels northward. Well, it could be that he was traveling through this Uto-Aztecan area north and might have even come to Utah. And there's a lot of Latter-day Saint traditions of Moroni visiting Utah. We can't really prove those accounts because they're either second or third hand accounts that came later, but it's still fun to think about. And if Moroni was part of this group, it seems natural that he would have traveled trade routes along the Uto-Aztecan geography. Now, Brian gets into some really interesting details in this essay. He talks about Egyptian and Uto-Aztecan, Hebrew, Phoenician, and Aramaic. And it might seem like he's grasping at all these different Semitic languages, but he goes into the details and show how they work in the Book of Mormon. So, for example, Nephi writes at the beginning of the Book of Mormon that he's writing in the learning of the Jews and language of the Egyptians. And scholars have debated, does language of Egyptians mean that they spoke Egyptian or that they wrote in Egyptian? Well, Brian would say the fact that he's found some Egyptian in Uto-Aztecan suggests that they were speaking some Egyptian languages. Now, with Phoenician, he suggests that when the Mulekites came into the Americas, they were this other group separate from the Nephites. And when they came into the Americas, they had some Phoenician. And when the Mulekites and the Nephites merged in the Book of Mormon, that brought about some Phoenician and Egyptian and Hebrew that lasted into the Uto-Aztecan language family. Pretty cool stuff. He even goes into more details about how Lehi and Nephi would have been from the northern kingdom, and after their ancestors migrated to Jerusalem, they would have had a certain language, and that also comes into Uto-Aztecan. Now, here's something interesting that points to other indigenous groups around the Nephites that I hadn't noticed before. And it's really neat hearing this coming from a linguist like Brian Stubbs. So he points out a few verses that seem to show how the Nephites were concerned about their language being lost among these other indigenous groups around him. So the first is Nephi at the beginning of the Book of Mormon. Now remember, Nephi starts writing the Book of Mormon after he gets into the New World. He's there for quite a few years when he starts writing. And so he records in 1 Nephi 3:19 that he worries about preserving the language of their fathers. And that would make sense if Nephi was worried about his language being lost with all these other indigenous peoples around him. Now in Alma 7:1, it says that Alma will attempt to address the people in his own language, which is interesting because it's suggesting there's these different languages among the Nephites. And in Mormon 9:32 through 33, it basically says that their Egyptian and Hebrew had been altered. So it's really neat to get this kind of linguistical evidence of other indigenous peoples around the Book of Mormon peoples. So what indigenous groups today does Brian Stubbs think is using a form of the Book of Mormon word Nephites for their own name? Well, Brian identifies one group within the Pima branch from Nephite to, I don't even know how to pronounce this, Navomi. And he also points to how this Pima word, meaning friend, brother, sister, or cousin, is related to some Aramaic forms of Nephite. And there's another group called the Korah, which call themselves by this word. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it, but he suggests that it came from this word here and turned into this word here. Now, we're not saying that these are the Nephites, just that over time, Semitic words have come into Uto-Aztecan and affected or influenced these words that they use for themselves and what they call themselves. Now, there is some debate whether Uto-Aztecan came from the north to the south or from the south to the north. Right now, it seems like most people think it comes from the north to the south, but Brian Stubbs and some other Uto-Aztecan scholars think there may be evidence that it started in the south. And Brian Stubbs would say that the languages down here are more diverse than the ones up north. And in his essay, he goes over how when the Nephites were destroyed, a lot of these Uto-Aztecan languages down here may have disappeared. But I just find all that fascinating. As you guys know, I love learning about Native American and Latter-day Saint history, especially here in Utah. But guys, I just want to spread more awareness about Native American and Latter-day Saint issues. There's some hard history that we need to deal with, and there's some things we need to fix. But at the same time, we can find neat little evidences like this. So Please follow along and share with other people. Help me to grow this channel so we could spread this important information. Thanks for watching. You can check out this video here, which I think is the most important thing to know about the Book of Mormon and Native Americans. Thanks. Bye.